Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Questioning Christianity, session 4 and 5. We are so glad that you could join us. For those who are here at Hinsdale Fil-Am Church, thank you for joining us. After a long work week, we are thankful that you could come and be here and be present. For those who are on YouTube, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, thank you so much for joining in. My name is Pastor Rodney. I have been the MC for this whole sermon series, and this Question Christianity is all about asking the tough questions, really having a safe space so that we could ask the question that you might be having or you might be pondering about for quite some time. You might be Christian, you might not be Christian, but this, whatever be the case, if you have any questions, this is a safe space, a place where you could really ask the questions and really get that dialogue going and really try to get a deeper understanding of what Christianity is all about. For those who are joining us for the first time, our sessions are usually like this. We have 30 to 40 minutes of talking from our senior pastor, Pastor Nestor, and then after, we will have a Q&A session where you have the opportunity to ask any questions based on the message tonight. And now today's going to be a little different. If you look on the screen, it's a little different. We have session 4 and 5 tonight. That means you need to really have your thinking caps on. We're going to talk about who am I and how do I know? That's the first session. And then the second session is how can I have an identity that isn't crushing? So this is what we're going to do. Since we are going to go through session 4 and 5, it's going to be a lot of information tonight, but I'm sure you are going to be blessed by the message. What we're going to do is that we're going to do session 4 in the beginning, and then to break it off, in the middle, we are going to have a little mini comment section where Pastor Nestor is going to ask you a question for you to really digest and really understand what the topic is all about. And then Pastor Nestor is going to go ahead into session 5. How can I have an identity that isn't crushing? So that's for tonight. We're going to have a session 4, a small mini comment section where you could talk and ask questions and make comments based on the topic in the fourth session, and then Pastor Nestor will go ahead and end in session 5, and then we'll have our Q&A. For those here at Hinsdale Fil-Am Church, we will also afterwards, the discussion doesn't end at the Q&A. We're going to have light refreshments in the fellowship hall, and we're going to be able to have the discussion going on and talk more about our Questioning Christianity sermon series. Now, the message, the one who will be leading out in our sermon series is none other than Pastor Nestor. He is our senior pastor of Hinsdale Fil-Am. And what this is, if this is your first time, this is the culmination of his 2.5 years of doctoral work. He has been working and been really researching on this topic of apologetics to really hone in exactly what it really means to share Christianity to the outside world, the non-religious. But as Pastor Nestor said, this is also for you. Maybe if you're a Christian, this is also for you. This is really all for those who are truly seeking and wanting to know more about what Christianity has to offer. Now, Pastor Nestor is a great man. I've been sharing little tidbits about him. One thing that I learned working with him is that he is very specific. He really knows the details. And that has been helpful for me because someone who likes to do an oversweeping idea of certain things that sometimes I don't get to see the minute details. So what's great about Pastor Nestor and his mind is that he thinks about the small things. And I think that's very important to have when it comes to talking about theology, when it comes to talking about faith, when it comes to talking about religion at large. Because what I've noticed talking with Pastor Nestor in our meetings is that he is able to find certain angles and certain perspectives that I have never seen before. So you're going to be blessed tonight. That's what I'm trying to say. You're going to be blessed tonight because based on all the research and all the information that he's gathered for his doctoral work, he's going to be able to bring a certain angle and understanding to help us know identity and how that relates to the love found through Jesus Christ. So with that out of the way, I'm going to invite our speaker for tonight, Pastor Nestor, come on up, and let's give him let's give him a hand as he comes up and message for tonight.
Thank you for those words. I appreciate that. Very glowing words. I'm humbled by your praises. Welcome everyone to Questioning Christianity, night number 4. And as Pastor Rodney said, we are covering 2 sessions in one. So I hope you brought 2 things, your thinking caps and your seat belts, because we're going to fly and we are going to learn. Let me just recap real quick what we've learned so far. And those of you who are tuning in online, we are glad that you've tuned in with us. I've received text messages and I know that there are some people that are watching online, so we're glad that you're here. 3 nights ago, on Tuesday night, we covered the topic, isn't the church responsible for so much pain? And we discovered that, yes, in some sense, that is the church that wasn't deep enough in Christianity. But what we realized is that one solvent for erasing or dissolving oppression is love, which can be found in Jesus. Night 2, we answered the question, how can a good God allow evil and suffering? Well, we learned that because God is love, He gives us the freedom to choose. And we also learned that even though it is very unfair for all of the evil and the suffering that we experience, and that some of you might be experiencing, even watching online, you might be going through some very difficult, extremely atrocious pain. It was infinitely more worse for God Himself to suffer in the form of Jesus Christ, which only showed that He is a God of love. Last night, we answered the question, there can only be one true religion, right? Well, we found out that there can be one true religion. And what we realized is in our search for truth, let me just open yesterday's paper here. What we learned is, what we do as we discover truth is the worldview or the belief system true, and is it useful? I think another word for useful would be, is it beautiful? So is it true and is it beautiful? And as we kind of dissect and answer, all right, if I'm going to believe in one of these religions, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, Judaism, or maybe you might claim atheism or agnostic, we have to ask, what is true and is it useful, peaceful, and beautiful? And what we realize is that Christianity can be true and it brings peace. And it also brings us back to this theme of love, shown in what Jesus has done on the cross of Calvary. Tonight, I do want to share a few things before we start. One, I want to remind you of the goals for this series. The first goal is to learn the questions of people who do not have the language of Christianity. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to learn what are the people outside of the Christian church and the Christian world, what are they asking, and what are the barriers to their belief? So that's one. And secondly, what we're trying to do is we're trying to answer the questions with the language of Christianity. I remember last night there were some questions related to our specific Christian denomination, which happens to be the Seventh-day Adventist denomination. And what we're trying to do is answer the questions about Christianity, not about specific denominations. That's a topic or a series for another time. And by the way, I am a committed Christian first, and secondarily a committed pastor, ordained pastor in the Seventh-day Adventist Church. But what we're trying to do here is answer the questions that people are asking about Christianity from the worldview of Christianity, not necessarily the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, if that makes sense. And then second thing I want to share is I want to say thank you for helping me learn. This is the first time that I have presented this way. I have not seen this much within our particular denomination, but I've been learning so much from you through the questions and answers. There have been people that I've been texting, people who are emailing me, giving me feedback. So as you are being sharpened, I am being sharpened. So thank you from the bottom of my heart. So the questions that we're going to try to ask, I'm going to try to do this in two sessions under 45 minutes. I hope that's even possible, but we'll see what we can do, okay? We're going to answer 2 questions. One, who am I and how do I know? And secondly, how can I have an identity that isn't crushing? So the first question is, who am I and how do I know? Now you might be thinking, why in the world are we even trying to answer this question? Who cares about this topic? Why does understanding the source of my identity matter? Friends, I'm going to share with you why this is relevant. You'll notice that in the media that we consume, whether it's television, the screen, or in music, sometimes there's a catchy beat or a catchy melody or a catchy line that we really like. I remember one speaker saying that behind the arts that we see and consume is a certain philosophy or a worldview that shapes those lyrics or shapes the music. And what I'm trying to share with you here is that behind how we view ourselves or how we understand our identity, there are certain ideas or philosophies or ways of thinking that actually shape our behavior or shape how we think and how we act. And so what I want to do is kind of go behind the scenes and ask, what does it mean to be me, right? Why does understanding the source of my identity matter? Because the sources from which you root your identity can either make you or break you. Let me give you an example. I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook. I like, social media is good. I like Facebook because of the social networking. The people I'm connected to people, relatives in the Philippines and in other countries, friends that I haven't seen for the longest time. There was a classmate from over 15 years ago that messaged me because she saw I was doing a series on Christian apologetics, and then she contacted me about just asking me questions. So, social media, Facebook is useful, right? But at the same time, some of the negatives that I have experienced are the social pressure. I feel like, do I have to post a picture of myself and my family all the time? And I see other people doing it, and I feel this pressure. And also, when I post something about myself, Facebook is really smart. It's blue, but then they have these red notifications that show up. And so there's something addicting about that. Like how many people actually liked my picture of my wife and I on the beach when we got married for 10-year anniversary, right? So I'm constantly checking it. And those are the negatives about Facebook. I'm not condemning Facebook. I'm just saying that those are some of the negatives of social media. And as well, also, I feel like when I go on there now, I want to connect with my friends, but I'm a customer for all of these products. Like, why is it that I talk about we need toilet paper, and then Charmin shows up on my feed? Like, what's up with that, right? So I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook, right? So here's the thing. The sources from which we root our identity can either make us or break us. And the question of identity in today's culture, especially here in the United States of America, is very prevalent in our modern and our Western culture. Let me give you a few examples. Who do you identify with, or who do you identify with politically? Republican, Democrat, or independent? It's a hypothetical question. But depending what you say, will either receive praise from one group or vitriol from another group. Here's another example. What about sexuality and gender in this culture? People are asking, who am I, what am I, and who should I partner with? Right? And depending what you say, can either receive praise or condemnation. What about the example of race? Who am I racially? Why am I racially privileged? And why am I racially underprivileged? The topic of identity is very important and is very prevalent in today's culture. In fact, everything that we see in the news, everything that we consume in today's media is shaped by our identities and the social groups to which we belong to. And so for this first topic, my response has 2 points, all right? So I'll run through this. This is part 1. I'll ask you a question, and then we'll go into part 2. So my first point is this. There are 2 approaches to identity, the ancient view and the modern view. What were the 2 again? The ancient view and the modern view. The prolific Canadian philosopher, his name was Charles Taylor, offers two ways to look at identity from a historical perspective. By the way, I purchased his book, Charles Taylor's book. He's a philosopher, and he has written a tome. I have not finished all 800 or 900 pages of it. It's just too big. But I've grasped enough to understand what he's saying. What he does is he contrasts two views of identity, and I'm going to write this here on this sheet. So there are two views of identity. So the first, and I think we already said it, the first view is what we call, and I want to summarize here, the ancient view, okay? Ancient view, okay? So that's the first view. The ancient view, he used the term in his book, The Secular Age. He called it the porous self, okay? And this was before, around the Enlightenment. So we'll just say that this was before, the tipping point between these two views of self was the 1700s, okay? Especially in the Western world. And then he said that around the 1700s, during the Enlightenment, there was what he calls the modern view, okay? So the ancient view, and then the modern view. And while he used the word porous here, he used the term buffered, okay, for the modern view. And that came after the 1700s. So let's break this down. What does this mean? The ancient view, or the porous self, was pre-modern. It was an ancient self that was porous in the sense that the self was permeable to some outside power. So let me give you an example. I'll pull out this stool. And he said that it was porous. And when I think of porous, I think of a sponge. It was permeable. So the ancient view was permeable to outside forces. Okay, so the question is, what were those outside forces? A person's identity was tied to the cosmos, whether they believed in a god or several gods or hundreds of gods. It was tied, maybe their identity came from a community, like a community told you what you should believe, or tradition, or an external and permanent source outside the self. So the ancient view was vulnerable to cosmic forces, or forces outside of itself. And then he said there was a shift that took place during the 1700s, around that time, where the self became modern or buffered. The modern buffered self is rooted in what we call, it's a big term, expressive individualism, which is to say that the person now looks within him or herself to figure out his or her identity. And so unlike the ancient self that was porous, like a sponge, modern identity is invulnerable to external forces. It's buffered, as he used, kind of like this. And what's really interesting as we think about when we say, especially in today's relativistic culture, which we talked about last night, I'm very open. Well, yes, they're very open to ideas, but in today's culture, they're closed to any outside forces as long as it validates what I believe. So there was a shift, okay? There was a shift around the 1700s. Modern identity is rooted not in the cosmos, like in the ancient view or something outside. Modern identity is rooted in intuition. It is not an identity to be found. It's an identity to be realized. I don't find my identity like we used to. I realize it. Now, when I think about our modern context, especially in this local church, which is a 40-year-old church, which primarily started and in its inception was a Filipino church, the Filipino culture is largely Christianized. And Asian culture still holds on to these ideas of tradition and respect your elder, this honor and shame culture, where we listen to something outside of ourselves, respect your elders, right? But then many of those who have formed this church came to a culture that is very modern, where they're like, okay, you could tell us what to believe, but really it doesn't jive with how I feel and what I think. And so there's this culture clash, and we can see that in this local setting, and we can see it in our world today. There's this culture clash. And Taylor asserts this. He says, instead of connecting with an outside source, such as family, people, or God, or some other cosmic good, now the source today we have to connect with is not outside us, but deep within. We come to think of ourselves as beings with inner depths. All right, this sounds kind of deep. How drastic has been the shift from the ancient view of ourselves, which is, I'll put here, open. Just put a big O there, right? And how drastic was this shift? And then the closed view, all right? How drastic was that shift from the ancient to the modern view? Here's my second point. The shift from the ancient view to the modern view of the self has been seismic. In the past several centuries, seismic shifts have taken place in the West's understanding of truth, all right? So what had happened was, here's what happened. The ancient view. We listened to the church, we listened to our family, we listened to our school teachers. But then during the Enlightenment, sometime around the 1700s, they said, well, why do we need to listen to outside forces? Why do we need to believe in the cosmos or a God when we can trust in reason? I can reason, I can trust my reasoning. I don't need some supernatural being to tell me about my existence. I can trust my reasoning. And what has happened as we've gone down through the years, 1800s and especially the 1900s, the trust in our reasoning has turned in trust in even our feelings and our intuitions. And that's where the shift took place, okay? The locus of truth house has now shifted inward, where the individual is now the determiner of what truth is. And there's this really fascinating book by the name of, written by Carl Trueman. The book is called The Rise and Triumph of the Modern Self, where he observes this inward shift. And you know what he calls that inward shift? He uses this big term. It's called the inner psychology, which is a big fancy way to say that now the shift turns toward our feelings and our intuitions for our sense of who we are and what the purpose of our lives is. Let me give you a modern example. I'm not condemning the song. I think that the melody is beautiful. But let me just read some of the lyrics, not to condemn the song, but to show you the philosophies behind the song. The snow glows white on the mountain tonight, not a footprint to be seen. A kingdom of isolation, and it looks like I'm the queen. The wind is howling like the swirling storm inside. Couldn't keep it in, heaven knows I tried. Don't let them in, don't let them see. Be the good girl you always have to be. Conceal, don't feel, don't let them know. Well, now you know, now they know. And then you know the lyrics, right? Let it go, can't hold it back anymore. Let it go. Turn away and slam the door. I don't care what they're going to say. Let the storm rage on. Where? Inside her heart, right? The cold never bothered me anyway. What that song is reflecting is not an ancient view of the self. It's actually reflecting a modern view of the self, which is the way that I define my reality, my value, and my worth and my identity is based upon the storm of my feelings within. And I need to shut the whole world outside because I know that that storm that's raging in my heart is telling me that this is my identity and this is where I get my worth. All right, so let me give you another example of this. This may go a little deep, but stay with me and you're going to see how we see this in our cultural institutions here, especially in America. There was a sociologist and a cultural critic by the name of Fil-Am. He died in 2006. And what he does is he applies psychology to describe patterns of change, of cultural change. He argues that the modern man is psychological and inward and no longer needs therapy from his community. He doesn't need therapy. Now, how does he define therapy? He says in traditional culture, right, the ancient view, okay, in traditional culture, the therapist was the expert who helped patients understand the values and practices of the community to which he belonged, right? So in the old self, in the ancient self, the open self that was open to cosmic external forces, the church, your parents, your friends, your government, your teachers, your school will give you therapy and tell you how you should be living. But then he says, in Rife's view, the community's role, in traditional culture, this is how it was, right? But then he says, Rife asserts that modern man no longer needs therapy from community. The modern person is saying, who are you to tell me? The storm is raging in my heart. I'm going to shut the door. I don't need to listen to you. He's saying that modern man no longer needs therapy or instruction from community since institutions are deemed socially and psychologically oppressive. He says objective and external truths are only constructs designed to subject the weak. And so what he's saying is that these absolute truths that you're trying to push on me and society and children, those are actually forms of oppression. So any truth statement that you make and any behavior, any code of ethics or behavior that you tell me to follow or live out is actually a form of oppression. And when in his view, modern man must now create his own destiny and manifest his destiny before the world. And check this out, look at this line. The community must not muzzle this individualistic expression, but must support it. Wow. The implications for this is huge. And friends, we feel this within our family circles, our social circles, where who are you to tell me how I should live? I know how I should live. Who is the church? The church, who are you as a church to tell me, as a teacher to tell me, as an authority figure to tell me? I can determine my truth. Therapy, you shouldn't be telling me what to do. Rather, you should be supporting what I decide to manifest. Let me give you an example of this. Last year, I was on a ferry speaking to one of my friends, Catherine Brownlow. We were sitting across each other, and I sat next to two women that were hanging out together, hanging out on the island as well, and we're on the same ferry back. They were from England. And we were having a conversation, and the woman from England asked my friend Catherine, hey, so what do you do for a living? And she said, my friend Catherine said, I'm a lawyer. And so they were talking, oh, that's great, that you're a lawyer. That's awesome, and that's great. And then, I was just waiting, like, I wonder what she's going to ask me. And so then she turned to me. I was sitting right next to her, and she said, well, what do you do for a living? Well, I said, I work for a church. I'm a pastor. And her look was like this. So, Catherine, you're a lawyer, right? She totally ignored me. She totally ignored me. Why was that? Because in her view, the church, the Christian church, is this absolute authority that oppresses some kind of value system that she believes in, that she lives by. I was seen as a clergy member, a clergyman, as socially and psychologically oppressive. How dare he? And that wasn't the only time I felt that kind of ostracization from someone in modern culture. It's what we see. So while it's important for us to understand our inner psychology and feelings, I think that there's a place for that. There's a big problem with our attempt to tune out outside voices. And here's my third point before we land this plane and open it up for some dialogue here. Here's my third point. I know myself, not from myself, but sources outside of myself. The way I understand Nestor Soriano and the way that you understand yourself is not from yourself or myself. It's from sources outside of ourselves. I know that's a deep statement. I'm going to explain it in simple terms. Charles Taylor, that same writer, wrote, "One is a self only among other selves." All right? So you can't just be yourself and understand yourself. His argument is you can only understand yourself if there are other selves around you. A self can never be described without reference to those who surround it. Let me give you an example. So my name is Nestor Allen Soriano. Did I choose that? No. Some people, Nestor Sr. and Lilia Soriano, decided to name me Nestor Allen Soriano. People out of myself gave me my name. One, I am 40 years old. There was someone who said that they thought I was 36. Good on you for saying that the other night. Thank you. Where did I learn to count? I learned to count numbers from teachers in school. I didn't learn it from myself. I learned it from an outside source. And then where did teachers learn numbers? Well, the number system was framed by people thousands of years ago, which has been passed down through the ages. I understand numbers outside of myself. What about my race and my nationality? So I'm a second generation Asian Filipino American, all right? So, one, I am racially Filipino, right, from my parents, outside of myself, and I am nationally American. I was born and raised in this country, outside of myself. And then what about my religion? I identify as a Christian primarily, and I also happen to belong to the Seventh-day Adventist denominations secondarily. I am a Christian because I believe that Jesus was God and that Jesus really raised from the dead. And I belong to the Seventh-day Adventist Christian denomination due to my family lineage. My great-grandmother was one of the first believers in this denomination in the Philippines. And also, I'm in this denomination because of the beauty of the Bible's teachings. I am a member of this local congregation, which is the Hinsdale Fil-Am Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is a community of people outside of myself. That's how I understand myself. I'm a member of this local community. I am part of this community who share similar values. Therefore, I know myself not from myself because I understand myself and my feelings tell me so, but I know myself not from myself, but from sources outside of myself. Does that make sense? Are you guys catching me? I'm sharing this because this is going to set a foundation for part number 2. And so here's my summary. How can I have an identity that isn't crushing? To answer this question, my first point was that the modern view of identity is feeble. Okay? I'm sorry. The question was, who am I and how do I know? My first point was there are 2 approaches to identity, the ancient view and the modern view. Second, the shift from the ancient view to the modern view has been seismic. And so the answer to that first question, who am I and how do I know, is this. I know myself not from myself, but sources outside of myself. Does that make sense? All right, so we're going to stop here. I want to allow us to digest this a little bit, and then I'm going to jump into part number 2. And we just set the foundation for part number 2, and you're going to see how this all coalesces and fuses together. So here's the question that I have for you for some digestion. Why does it matter to you that you understand yourself not from yourself but from outside sources? Why is the topic of identity even important to you? Let me ask that question. Why is this even important? Why is it important? Why is this topic of identity important? And why is it important that I seek my identity from outside of myself? Any thoughts or any questions about that? Yes? Okay. And we're just going to digest this for a little bit, and then I'll jump into number 2. Just want to give you some time to digest this.
I used to be an agnostic, actually,
Okay.
almost atheist. But when I started learning about Christian and started kind of understanding it, there were 4 questions that I needed to know. Where did I came from? What is my purpose? Does my life has a meaning? Where does morality come from? What is truth, right? And then, do I have a destiny? Those are the 4 questions that I really wanted to answer. And I think after getting those answers, I was able to have a clear idea probably, who am I?
That's good. I love those 4 questions. I think you shared that with me before we talked tonight. Those are great questions. Great questions to answer. Anyone else? Why is this a topic of identity important, and why is it important to you, for you to find your identity even outside of yourself? Any thoughts, questions, comments? I know it's a little deep, but we're going to try to land this plane, or at least apply this in the second part. Okay, so we have a comment over here. All right, the comment over here was to satisfy your curiosity. That's good. Okay, yes.
So I revert to John Lennox again and put this down to earth he said, my kid came to me and asked me, Dad, why am I here? And you know his answer? Because I wanted you to be. I think it's very important to understand that even before we were born, God had a plan for our lives. That gives me a lot of significance and a vantage point to have meaning in my life.
It's good. So if we assume that there is a God, then it's very comforting to know that there was a grand purpose for my life even before I was born. Well said. What else? What else is on your mind? What else are you thinking? Why is this topic of identity important? Why is this topic of identity important? Anyone else? Anyone else? Yes, you have a thought over here. Last one. We'll get some water too before we start number 2.
Because He defined us. He give us a purpose of living. If we don't have, we don't know what we are, how are we gonna survive in this world? How are we gonna interact with others? I need to know for certain who I am in order to make a living.
That's right. So what you're saying is this topic of identity is important because it defines us. And if I don't know who I am, then I'm lost. Who am I as a human being? It's a good point. Very true. Very true. Are your thinking caps still on? Are your seatbelts still on? All right. This is part 2, okay? This is session 2. I've spent more than half, so in chapter 3 of my project thesis, I spent more than half of chapter 3 just writing about this topic. And so I know it's heady, but I'm going to land this plane and I'm going to show you some of the implications of how beautiful the Christian worldview can be. So in 1998, there was an actor by the name of Jackie Chan. Do you know who Jackie Chan is? Okay, Jackie Chan. He starred in an action comedy film entitled Who Am I? 1998, I remember it. And after he was left for dead, the solo commando, that was Jackie Chan, struggled to regain his memory. At one point, he was confused about his identity. You know, it's interesting, in my research, I actually had to cite the movie and cite the location of the saying. And I had to I skimmed through the movie to find the exact location, and I found it. And Jackie Chan lost his memory, and at one point he screamed, "Who am I?" I had never forgotten that. Who am I? In fact, when I was talking to Pastor Rodney about this topic of identity, he said, "You know what I think about when I think about identity? I think about Jackie Chan's movie, Who Am I?" And that's interesting that you thought about that as well. Who am I? This is exactly what we're trying to answer, okay? So what we're trying to answer in this second part is, how can I have an identity that isn't crushing or that doesn't leave me disappointed, all right? So what we're going to do is we're going to critique the modern view of identity, and what we're going to do is also show several reasons why the Christian view of identity is more appealing. And I'm going to share with you thoughts and ideas that you might not have heard before. When I read this and I understood this and synthesized this together, it was illuminating for me and groundbreaking. So here's my first point in my response. The modern view of self, this modern view is feeble. And why is that? Because the modern view is actually rooted in itself. You see, the modern man is rooted in the shifting sands of his feelings and his preferences. And according to one writer by Robert Bella in his book, The Habits of the Heart, modern culture has turned inward and given the self the power and the authority to choose its own values. And we see this in today's culture. Just do you. Be yourself. One problem with being steered by feeling and preference, though, is that they constantly change. A few years ago, I was on an airplane, and I was sitting next to a man. I had the middle seat. My wife was in the aisle. Catherine was in the aisle. There was a man on the window seat, and we struck up a conversation. And he was telling me he was flying to South America, and I said, "Hey, tell me why you're flying to South America." "Well, I'm there. I found these mushrooms from this country, and I'm going down there to consume these mushrooms." I said, "Okay, to consume mushrooms." And then we started talking about religion and values. And then I started talking about morality. And I had shared with him, I don't know how we got here. I don't know how we went from mushrooms to marriage, but for some reason we were talking about marriage. And I shared with him my perspective of commitment and fidelity and keeping a promise and a vow in marriage. I said, look, I think it's important that even though my feelings say otherwise, it's important for me to be committed in marriage. And you know what he said to me? He said, man, that sounds so restrictive. He said, I should be able to follow my feelings and to be with someone who makes me happy. I mean, seriously, like, if I marry someone and that person doesn't make me happy anymore, then, and if I find someone else that makes me happy, then I should have the freedom to, leave that individual and go for that person who's going to make me happy. The problem with the modern view and following our feelings is that they constantly change. All right? They constantly change. In the words of that man, one day I like this woman, and the other day I like that woman. Our feelings are unstable. And I love what one writer by the name of Timothy Keller writes in his book, Making Sense of God. He said, if your identity is just your desires, they are going to be changing all the time. If in every situation you seek your own self-interest, responding in ways that get the approval and control you want at the moment, then identity essentially disappears. It's gone. And another problem with trusting my feelings is that if my values are determined by my preferences, then there is no real way to define what is good and what is bad, and what is right and what is wrong. The modern man's interests are constantly shifting. Thus, there is no firm way to say some values are better than others if we're going to say that our values are based on intuition and feeling. For example, let's say that one man, he's a family man, and he declares to his family and his friends, I believe that people must be honest in all times and in all circumstances. And 2 years later, when offered a position in his company, his values of honesty shift and because it requires him to lie. Robert Bella, in his book, Habits of the Heart that I mentioned, argues that what sits at the heart of his shifting values is that he is his own moral universe, and there is finally no way to reconcile conflicting claims about what is good in itself. Does that make sense? If we look inside and trust our own intuitions and feelings, we become our own moral universe, and there's no way to reconcile these conflicting claims about what is good and what is bad. So we've learned that the modern view of identity is feeble. And we learned in the last session, or the last teaching, we learned that I know myself not from myself, but sources outside of myself. So here's what we're going to do. What I'm going to share with you is, I'm going to share with you 2 reasons why I believe the Christian view of the self is more durable. And I hope this blows your mind as much as it blew my mind. I mean, this is amazing. At least it was amazing for me. So here's the first reason why I believe that the Christian view is durable. First reason, Christian identity is given, it is not gained. The pop singer Madonna, you guys know who Madonna is. She's a singer and songwriter, and she laments the emptiness of success. And this is what she really wrote. And I think I read this before, I think a few months ago or last year. She said, I have an iron will, and all of my will has always been to conquer some horrible feeling of inadequacy. It's interesting she said that. I push past one spell of it and discover myself as a special human being. Then I get to another stage and think I'm mediocre and uninteresting, again and again. My drive in life is from this horrible fear of being mediocre. And that's always pushing me. Because even though I've become somebody, I still have to prove that I am somebody. I found that really interesting. She said, because even though I've become somebody, I still have to prove that I am somebody. My struggle has never ended, and it probably never will. I appreciate her vulnerability. Madonna's fear of ordinariness is the fuel that drives her engine to achieve. When an achiever's self-worth is tied to performance and success, she is emotionally bankrupt because she never entirely reaches her goal. Well, I made this hit album, but it's not enough. I need another album. Well, It wasn't too risque. Let me be more risque with the next album. And they're never satisfied. I need that next degree. Nothing wrong with degrees. I need to climb the corporate ladder. Nothing wrong with climbing the corporate ladder, or nothing wrong with growing in your influence and leadership, or nothing wrong with getting good grades in school. Nothing wrong with being on the honor roll. But when that becomes the sole the sole source of our identity and value and worth, it's problematic. Christianity, on the other hand, offers a more liberating identity. Listen to this. Follow me here. The Apostle Paul writes in his first letter to the believers in Corinth about his freedom. Catch this. He said, and Paul is one of the writers of the New Testament, and he wrote a letter called Corinthians. He said this, "But with me, it is a very small thing that I should be judged by you or by any human court. In fact, I do not even judge myself, for I am not aware of anything against myself, but I am not thereby acquitted. It is the Lord who judges me." You see what he's saying? I'm not worried about you, not worried about me. One, Paul is saying that the judgment and of opinions of people, while they do mean something, they actually mean very little to him in the grand scheme of things. His identity is not attached to what other people think about him. Although he can find it from other people, the primary source of his identity is not attached to what other people think about him. Secondly, this is striking. Paul says that he is not even anxious about his own opinions about himself. I'm not too worried about the opinions of what people think about me. And then he says in the text, neither do I judge myself. I'm not worried about myself. Number three, rather, he is more concerned about what God thinks of him. And the question is, what does God think about him? Ooh, I love this. In the beginning of his Corinthian letter, Paul writes, now this is amazing. In the same letter, he writes, "I give thanks to my God always for you because of the grace of God that was given you in Christ Jesus." Let me read that again. "I give thanks to my God always for you because of the grace of God that was given you in Christ Jesus," which is to say, the grace of God, which is namely, in other words, another name for the gospel, is a central theme in his writings. And he says that the gospel claims that the basis of someone's acceptance with God, which is also called salvation, has nothing to do with her achievement, but has everything to do with Christ's achievement. Keep following me here. The incarnation, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus demonstrate God's matchless love and grace for humanity, and they stand as the crowning acts of achievement, not what we have done, but what Jesus has done. And what Christianity teaches, what true Christianity teaches, is this, that human identity from the Christian worldview is not rooted in human achievement. Instead, human identity is grounded in faith that delights in the wonder of Christ's achievements. A person's identity, therefore, is not gained by work, but given as a gift. Let me say that again. A person's identity, therefore, is not gained by work, not something I do, but it is given as a gift. Let me apply this to a triangle that I made on opening night, okay? This is really interesting, this connection. I had said on Tuesday night that people can be categorized in two camps, and I based this on the parable of Jesus in Luke chapter 15 about the prodigal sons. There were actually two sons, the younger, immoral, apathetic, irreligious, non-religious brother, and the older, moral, fanatically religious, there's nothing wrong with being moral. He was moralistic, and he was fanatically religious, okay? For in the non-religious world, our identity, especially in the different roles that we play, is based on our achievements. In school, you want to get in the honor roll? Study well. Nothing wrong with studying well, but it's gained. Want a promotion at work? Well, you work hard, you achieve that, and you're rewarded, right? Does this happen? Question for you. Does this happen in the religious world? I said yesterday that it was the religious leaders, the Pharisees, who knew the scriptures and the Bible very well. But it was the Pharisees, the religious leaders, the people who knew their Bibles well, that played a role in crucifying the Savior. Why was that? Because their philosophy of life was not based upon the goodness of God, but rather the goodness of their obedience to God's commands and plus the other commandments that they added to God's law and God's commandments. Does it make sense? And this is why, in that parable, who gets the party? The immoral son or the moral son? The moralistic son. He gets the party because he comes to his senses. The Pharisees, represented by the older brother, don't get the party. Why? Because unlike the immoral brother, the moralistic brother and the moralistic religious leaders are actually blinded by their own achievements. And because they were blind by their own achievements, they could not receive and understand and comprehend the achievements of God by sending Jesus Christ on planet Earth. And they ended up crucifying him. So whether you're non-religious or very religious or moralistic, it's all the same. These two philosophies of living are all based on who? Me. It's based upon what I can achieve by my efforts. Therefore, my identity, my understanding and my worth of myself is based on how much I try and I work and how much I achieve. It's gained, right? But from the Christian worldview says, it doesn't even matter how much work you do. Nothing you do can ever allow you to be accepted by God. And since that's the case, he sent his son in the name of Jesus Christ to live the perfect life that we deserve. And he actually lives that perfect life, and then he dies. Secondly, he dies the penalty that we deserve. And he becomes the greatest object of all our affections, because he is the one who achieved everything for us. And the way that we are accepted and saved by the Christian God is not by my achievements, but by the achievements of Christ. I don't gain it by my achievement. I gain salvation or acceptance with God based on faith in what Jesus has done for me. Does that make sense? So, Madonna, you can be a somebody, not by your own efforts, but by believing and receiving the true somebody, Jesus Christ. Now, Christian identity is not only given. That's the first reason why I think and I believe that the Christian view of identity is durable, because it's given, not gained. And here's something that I found quite interesting in my research. Christian identity is satisfyingly enduring. Now follow my train of logic here, and I'm going to land this plane. All human beings desire happiness, right? I was thinking when I drive home, there's a certain, when you drive home, there's a certain route that you take to go home. And we always choose the path of least resistance. When you travel around like 5 or 6 p.m. or early in the morning between like 6:30 and 8, you know that there's traffic, and so you go on Google Maps and you press, directions, and it gives you like 2 or 3 options. And which option do we usually choose? We choose the path of least resistance. Why? Because we prefer pleasure over pain, right? We prefer happiness, getting there faster, than having to wait in traffic, right? It was the French philosopher Blaise Pascal who said, "All men seek happiness. There are no exceptions. This is the motive of every act of man, including those who go and hang themselves." This is true of every single individual. Modern man's drive for achievement offers glimpses of happiness, but he is still empty. Now, I caught this line in a documentary that I have never forgotten. Have you all seen the movie Free Solo of Alex Honnold? This young man, this guy is crazy. He free solos. He climbs mountains and the side of mountains without any ropes. It is bizarre. And he climbed El Capitan. Alex Honnold, this American rock climber, he climbed El Capitan in Yosemite Park without ropes. And in the movie, the documentary Free Solo, about his daring climb of El Capitan, Honnold comments about the momentary pleasure of achievement. Now, check this out. When I heard this, I was like, I'm going to come back and I'm going to write that down. He said, if you're seeking perfection or achievement, free soloing is as close as you can get. And it does feel good to feel perfect for a brief moment. That's exactly what he said. If you're seeking perfection, free soloing is as close as you can get, and it does feel good to feel perfect for a brief moment. It's temporary. It does feel good to be perfect and to achieve well. Nothing wrong with being a moral person. But to base my identity and my worth on my moralism or on my zealous religiosity, it feels good, but it only lasts for a moment. Success is not permanently delightful. My success in my achievements, education, work, my commitment to the moral code in my Christian tribe, it feels good, but it is temporary and fleeting. And King Solomon attests to this temporary delight of success. You know, King Solomon was a king. He's written about in the Old Testament. He shows how success and material gain are fleeting. He amassed enormous wealth. He built elaborate houses and vineyards. He became famous. And he said in the book of Ecclesiastes, which he wrote, then I considered all the work of my hands that I had done and the toil that I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. And it was the recent psychologist Jonathan Haidt. He wrote the book, he's the author of The Happiness Hypothesis. It's an amazing book. Okay? He's not a religious person. And he says this about King Solomon. He says, the author of Ecclesiastes wasn't just battling the fear of meaninglessness, he was battling the disappointment of success. The pleasure of getting what you want is often fleeting. And friends, I feel that every time I buy a new tech gadget. I like my technology. Ooh, I remember when I purchased my new phone, my iPhone, what do I have now? It's like 13 mini. Ooh, this feels really cool to have this. And I reminded myself, Nestor, you have felt this feeling before. Don't worry, in a few weeks you won't care if you drop it. Right? You know the feeling. Get a new computer. You get a new car. Oh, we'll keep this car clean and pristine until I get that first scratch. Right? We're excited about the toys. We're excited about our achievement. But you and I know, Solomon knows, that our achievements and our gains don't really last. So if the euphoria of success and stuff is fleeting, then where can we find a more satisfying source of happiness? It was the commentator from the New York Times, David Brooks, and he says this, and I found this really interesting. He said, relationships are the key to happiness. What is the key to happiness? Relationships. People who live in the densest social networks tend to flourish, while people who live with few social bonds are much more prone to desperation and suicide. We have some friends here, members of this church. You were just at a family party out southwest where it was hot. I mean, there were like, dozens of family members there hanging out together. People who have the densest social networks tend to flourish. And that writer, Jonathan Haidt, concurs that relationships are the best source of happiness. In his book, The Happiness Hypothesis, he says this: if you want to predict how happy someone is or how long she will live, you should find out about her social relationships. I'm going to pick on my mother-in-law here, she's here from Indonesia. She's been here be here in the U.S. for a few weeks. She is socially connected. In Indonesia, outside of the U.S., many people use WhatsApp as their messenger, their messenger device or the messenger app. And she has how many social groups and friends in her social network? And what Jonathan Haidt is saying, and he agrees with David Brooks, if you want to predict how happy someone is, how long she will live, you have to find out about their social relationships. So, check this out. Follow me here. The essence of Christianity is not achievement, but relationship. Christianity teaches that God is triune in nature. There is one God who exists in three co-eternal persons. One God, three forms, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And even before mankind was created, based on the Christian worldview and Christian teaching, the Trinity, the Godhead as is another term, has existed together for all of eternity, and they are fundamentally relational. Before there was even any creation, they were together. Before there were any laws or code of ethics laid down for humanity, they were together. They were relational. And unlike other monotheistic religions that we learned about, like Judaism and Islam, the Christian view of God paints a unique, dynamic portrait of love, intimacy, and unity between each person of the Trinity. There was one writer, John, one of Jesus' disciples, who declared that God is love. And it was C.S. Lewis, that great British writer and author who converted from atheism to Christianity. He argued that God has to contain at least two persons, because love is something that one person has for another person. Isn't that interesting? I cannot understand myself only by myself. I can only understand myself from an outside source. And it isn't interesting that with another outside source, another human being, gives us the capacity and shows us, and even gives us the definition of what love is and what it looks like. C.S. Lewis says there has to be at least two persons. Each person of the Trinity has two other persons to share this love. And the Trinity invites human beings to enter the relational and eternal pattern, and Lewis calls it a dance. And he says, C.S. Lewis says, there is no other way to the happiness for which we were made until human beings enter the dance of the Trinity. You know, I like to, ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. We do that in my home, and our girls ask. Eliana, 6, Emily, 3, and then we hold hands as a family, and we do that dance together. Ring around the rosy, pocket full of posies, ashes, ashes, we all fall down. And there's something about us carrying the girls and them giggling and laughing, and then when we all fall down, the laughs and the giggles and the joy and the happiness, the euphoria of that love when we dance together with the Ring Around the Rosie dance. And C.S. Lewis says that you can experience that when you enter the dance with the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. If it is true that the true source of our happiness doesn't lie in our gains, whether it's our achievements at school, at work, or even our material wealth or the material things that we gain, but it is found in relationships, then it is true that the relationship network that we have will help us to be happy and to live longer. But we know within the human dimension that even the greatest relationships that we have, the closest relationships we have in our human network, are not promised to last forever. Because whether you're non-religious or religious, we know that the lifespan of human beings is finite. And I find it quite interesting that we as human beings, at least from the Christian worldview, can enter and understand and be in a relationship with a God that will not pass away, but that lasts forever. And that I can enter into this relational dance, this intimacy with Him, that will last for all of eternity. Now, the question that was on the screen, how can I have an identity that isn't crushing? Okay? How can I have an identity that isn't crushing? My first point was that the modern view of identity is feeble. And my second point was that the Christian view of identity is durable. And I gave two reasons. One, Christian identity is given, it is not gained. And then Christian identity is satisfyingly enduring. Why does this matter? The Christian view provides an identity that is not crushing and that it is satisfying. And I believe that human beings are meant to love. And while some of us come from difficult backgrounds, some have had strong homes, some have not. Even the most perfect home has deficiencies of love. And I believe that why this is helpful and practical is that as a believer in Christ, I have the opportunity to believe in a God that is fundamentally love and relational, which then unlocks for me the understanding and also the capacity to love other people around me. And what's so amazing about Christianity, especially the Christian worldview, is that this God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit that loves us unconditionally, even when I offend him and I reject him. And when I behold that kind of love, and this is where the rubber meets the road for most of society, I can love people that love me, but how can I love my enemies? The Christian worldview allows me to view love from this God who loves everyone despite their achievements, and even when they fail on those achievements and fail him and reject him. And he gives me the possibility to know how to even love and care for those who are different from me and even my enemies. The Christian view of self is durable, it's satisfying, and I hope that this talk gave you something to think about and was helpful. So this is where we're gonna finish. Thank you for your time, and I'm gonna open up for some live questions. Thank you for your patience. We went long here, but I appreciate your patience through this.
Thank you, Pastor Nestor. Now, it's a lot to process. It is a lot. But what the good thing about our arrangement of our session is that we allow Q&A. So if you have any questions, maybe if something was still a little foggy to you, or maybe something popped up in your mind and you were thinking, well, what about this? This is your time to ask questions. So if anybody here would like to ask a question, feel free to raise your hand. And anyone on YouTube, if you have any questions, feel free to type on the comment section below the live stream and I'll get to you. And for those here in church, if you are a little, if you feel embarrassed to raise your hand in front of people, go ahead and go on the YouTube, and then you could write down your comment there as well. So any questions as we start?
I think most people were like, well, that was a lot of information. But let's digest this. I'm curious and eager to hear your questions.
If my identity comes from outside sources, do I have to behave myself so I could get a good rating? Or because I don't seem to believe it. I know how I feel, and knowing myself, I could tell if I'm doing right or wrong if I will compare myself against probably the Ten Commandments.
Sure.
And what does Jesus says in the Bible. I don't rely on outside sources. I don't believe I have to behave well so I can get a good rating from outside sources. I myself is myself.
Okay, so what is your question again? What is the question again?
I don't know what is my question.
Or was that a comment?
Do I have to behave well so I can get a good rating of what I am or who I am
Right.
from outside sources?
I see. Well, first of all, we have to define what a good rating is. From human sources, we can get a good rating for our performance. Of course, you all are judging me for my performance of these topics at the series. It's natural in human nature, but within the Christian worldview and the way that God views us, it's fundamentally different. Because the good rating like we can never, even if I try to get a good rating, I'll never get a good rating with God, which is why he sent his son to get the best rating, and then he credits that best rating on my account through faith. And that's what's so radical about the Christian worldview and the Christian religion. But thank you for your comments. I appreciate that.
I'd like to share this very, very fresh. And like Pastor Nestor said, the relationship is very important. If you guys watched the Wimbledon Championship last Sunday,
I watched the highlights a lot.
well, Djokovic finally broke down after he said something. And this is what he said. I think my son, even if I lost, he's still supporting me.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then he breaks down. Then eventually he says, I still love you and we will love each other.
Yeah, I remember that.
So, there's something more important than the Wimbledon trophy in this particular case. What was more important for Djokovic was the relationship with the son. And I cannot doubt it for a while that he wasn't performing to just get the trophy. He was performing for the sake of his son. And I think that's the beauty of Christianity.
Yes.
You don't perform in order to earn something from God. Okay? You perform in order to praise God because he cares for you. And secondly, that, like you said, Pastor, even if I fail, God still cares for me. That's an awesome God. And in answer to what Lita is saying, that outside source is God. And that God, even if I fail, still accepts me. And that's the good news in Christianity.
Well said. Beautiful picture and accurate depiction of what Christianity is all about. Thank you. Thank you so much. Any other questions or thoughts? We have one right here. And those of you who are watching online, feel free to ask as well. I know we had quite a bit yesterday, and I know we have some viewers online. Watching.
Well, it's more of a comment. I think I just base this on my experience. Of course, it's easier to love those who loves you. It's easier to your friends love, but I find it really, you're struggling to love your enemies.
It's true.
And the other thing is to, based on your experience, you experience a lot of things. And when you react, sometimes you react very badly. That is your intuition, that is your kind of habit. And it's very hard to really take that out. And as you said, I cannot depend on myself to do that. I have to depend on outside forces to do that.
Well said. And related to loving our enemies, it's very difficult. Very difficult. The Christian worldview. Well, if you look at Jesus himself, while he was on the cross, he says, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." So he's forgiving the people that are crucifying him. And then, like practically speaking, when we encounter those situations where we have some relational beef with someone, Jesus says, pray for them. And so even if you have relational distance, he challenges us to pray for that person. And by doing so, instead of, reliving those thoughts, you're able to pray for the individual, which will help alleviate some of the pain and the shame and the trauma that people might experience. Good point. Thank you. Yes, question.
You mentioned about the two views, the ancient view and the modern view.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think there's a third one to it, meaning a combination of the ancient and the modern views would be the third category?
What do you think? What do you think the third category would be?
The combination, infusion of both. Because some people say, hey, you know what? He's ancient, but he's also modern.
Good point. I think we cannot just trash the modern view. I think the benefit of the modern view is to actually, I think the benefit for society has been the opportunity for us to look in and to actually name our emotions and to name the feelings that we're experiencing. And the first thing in recovery and healing is to be able to name that. Like, I'm feeling this, or I'm experiencing this. So I think that's one That's one benefit. The the disadvantage, though, is to take that same belief and then to apply that to, our value system or our belief system. There could be a mix. There could be a mix. Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about how, when I say the modern view, this is more prevalent in the Western world, Europe, United States, New Zealand, Australia, very prevalent there. But then when you go to other countries and other continents, they hold a very ancient view or a traditional view where they're still vulnerable to external and outside forces, right? And so I think to answer your question, I think the blend of being able to respect external sources or even respect your elders and your community, while at the same time being able to have a safe space to question the community and question the beliefs of the system, I think that's a safe place to be. I think that that's a safe place to be. Like I said yesterday, that we can hold on to our convictions, right? But at the same time, we can also be open to learn from others and to be corrected. And I think that's a safe position to be in. And as I said yesterday, Jesus himself held on to his Father relationally, but was also to eat with the quote-unquote the scum of the earth, because he held that, I know I respect my Father, I respect the community, but at the same time, I'm open. And that to me is an amazing model. Yes, absolutely. Good point, very good point. Any other questions or thoughts? Oh, there's a thought here, a question? Yes.
I think it's a thought. This is really a deeper understanding of our identity as I knew it personally. But my thought and question is, the identity that God gifted to us is a spirit. It's a free gift to us. And I believe that each one of us will bear the fruit of the Spirit, and that gives us an identity in our character, around our community, families, and relationship to work here and there. Mm-hmm. And it is an outside source.
Yes.
So it's very clear to me by this series that God is so loving that he gifted to us a spirit, yes, so we can bear fruit. That's all.
That's a great thought. That's a great thought, because the question that's a really good thought. The question is, well, then how do I gain that identity from Christ? And you know what the Christian story says? That the way that happens, Jesus calls this in John chapter 3, the new birth, or being born again. And being born again has nothing to, I can't change my nature. But he says really to the legalistic Pharisee in John chapter 3, Nicodemus, the chief of the Pharisees, that your achievements are never going to make you accepted by God. But your nature has to be born so that your eyes can be open to the beauty of Jesus' achievements, my achievements. And the way that happens, God loves us so much that he pursues us, and then he initiates the desire for him. And what's so amazing, this about human nature, that we have desires for all of the objects that we seek. I have a desire for new technology. You have a desire to go, finish high school. You have a desire, you have a goal for something, an object, and you have a desire for that. And if God exists, and Jesus exists, he gives us that desire, and Christianity teaches that is his job to plant those desires and to draw us to himself. And so why wouldn't I want to be part of that religion, that worldview, that belief system. It's so beautiful. Thank you for that thought.
Pastor Nestor, just a comment. I love how when our identity stems from this invaluable worth that was given by a God who undeservingly gave me that worth, right? Is that the joy is actually reproducible.
Yes.
Because what happens is when I go out into the circles and the sphere of influences that I have at work, at school, treating somebody who's a bagger at Jewel, just out in the community, I realize that I cannot treat them any worse than I know God has treated me, because Jesus died for that person as well. God loves that person as well. Who am I? And it's very humbling. Who am I to dole out suffering when, in fact, I can dole out joy? And so the application that's why I'm happy that I am not the source of my identity. It's my God, because now it's actually shareable, because the source is infinite. And so I can love, and that's the challenge, I think, is that when God loves us, he wanted to connect with us, and he wanted us to share that connection to others around us. So it's humbling, it's totally joyful, it's reproducible.
Yes.
But it also holds you accountable.
It's very true.
Yeah.
Well said, well said. And as I was thinking as you were sharing, and there are times where we want to share that joy. We all know as human beings that there's some part of us that still has a deficiency of love. We feel that. And how do I know that? Because there are times we feel guilt and shame, which I believe is a deficiency of love. And even when we experience that deficiency of love, and then we might not carry out a good act or treat someone as they deserve, our loving God says he doesn't give up on us, but he says, hey, I forgive you. Keep moving forward. Keep looking to me and my achievements, and you will continue to grow so that you can reproduce that and share that with others more and more. And it's so amazing that even in our deficiency, like, he still works with me. And I just give, all praise to my Christian God.
I guess it's a Sabbath, and we're going into the Sabbath school lesson tomorrow. I just want to make a connection. For the Christian, identity is substitution and exaltation. Substitution in the sense that you are not identified in yourself, you're identified in Jesus. And whatever you needed to accomplish, Jesus accomplished for you. Whatever you needed to pay for, Jesus paid that for you. That's all given to you in one package in Jesus. What's the result of that? The result of that is you bow down to Jesus Christ because of his great love. And it's the irony of all ironies that if you look for happiness and joy, you will not find it. But if you look for God, like C.S. Lewis said, and praise him, joy will come to you. And I think that's the importance. It's outside of you in Jesus Christ. And the more you look outside of you in Jesus Christ, those happiness and fulfillment and meaning will come to you if you put your trust
Well
in
said.
him.
Well said. And I would add to that, not only he is outside, he chooses to also live inside, so it's both and. It's a beautiful thing. He's outside but also here. And the merging of those two worlds just unleashes this understanding of love and the capacity to love. Did we have any online questions or comments? Okay.
Well, Pastor, just to let you know that I'm listening to you. and
I'm
from
glad you
what I
are.
understand, to summarize, is your ancient is based on your identity is based on outside, not on your. And the second one is based on yourself. I guess my conclusion, my understanding here is it boils down to what actually the devil wants. He wants to be God, so he wants us to be God also. And that's how we can we're trying to make our identity now, based on ourselves, based on our intuition.
Yes, a good point. In the Christian story, Christian story believes that there's a devil named Satan. And yeah, as I mentioned before, middle letter of sin is I. Same thing with Lucifer, same thing with pride, same thing with the word sin, right? So it's an exaltation of me, whether I'm irreligious or even religious. So if I'm focused upon myself, that's exactly the nature of the enemy. And when Jesus came, he defeated and also revealed to the world what love actually looks like, which then allows us to love other people. Good point. Welcome back from Arizona. Is it Arizona?
This is just a comment in addition to what Chris said, the ancient and the modern, who identifies from the outside and from yourself exactly what Satan really likes, because this is what's happening. Nowadays, you cannot tell me whether I'm a man or a woman.
Yes.
To say myself, I have to decide myself. And it's happening.
Sure. So thank you for that statement. It's based on, well, first of all, this is based on the idea of a Satan, of a supernatural force, is based on the Christian understanding and the Christian scriptures. And it assumes and teaches that there is an outside influence that influences and confuses mankind. Whatever your opinion is of gender and sexuality, and that's why the topic of identity is so prevalent in today's culture. What's important in understanding our identity is is realizing that it's not just in me, but it's outside of myself, and that I can begin to understand the image of God, who I really am, as I identify with Him. And He helps me to understand. He helps me to understand who I am.
Friends, this is a very engaging conversation, and just like Pastor Nestor said, this identity topic is very prevalent in our society today, with all the major themes of what we're seeing in our society in terms of gender and also the fluidity of what it is according to many people. But isn't it good to know that we find our identity in something that changes not? Our feelings may change. One day I may feel like Taco Bell, another day I may feel like Chipotle. But it's good to know that His love never changes for us, and we can find root in that. So friends, the conversation can continue. This is just the formal aspect, but now we have a time where we could go to refreshments. Those who are here at our church, we're going to have refreshments, and keep the conversation going. There's still many things we could talk about. I know that there are things that you have something in your mind, but you probably just didn't want to share. So let this time of refreshment and socializing be a time where you could talk to your peers, talk to Pastor Nestor, talk to one of the teams here at our church, and really just see of where we can find our connection moving towards the one who has love. So God bless you all. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night. Thank you, those who are on YouTube. We will be streaming at 11:15 tomorrow. We will have a church service, which will have worship and also time of prayer. You are more than welcome to join us. And then at 2 o'clock will be our last session with Pastor Nestor. Have a good night, and God bless.
Can I say something real quick?
Sure, go ahead.
If those of you, even those online in the area, the vicinity, in the state, want to come, if you come at the last session at 2 o'clock, I'm going to give a survey, and even if you caught one teaching, your filling out of the survey will help me in my education. So please, if you can't make it to the 11:15, you can watch at home, but come at 2 because I would love to get your feedback, even if you caught one of the sessions. Thank you so much.